I am my mother's lawyer. The words exploded inside the courtroom like thunder on a summer afternoon. Judge Harrison froze, his gavel halfway in the air, and every whisper in the room died instantly. At the center of the polished oak courtroom in downtown Chicago, 9-year-old David Thompson stood straight beside his mother, Janet. His small frame hidden inside an oversized blazer he had borrowed from a neighbor. His glasses slid slightly down his nose, but his eyes, sharp and unflinching, locked on the man who had tried to erase him. Across the room, Robert Wellington III, dressed in a navy suit worth more than Janet's annual salary, almost dropped his coffee. He had come into this hearing convinced it was a formality, a simple matter. Of wealth against poverty, power against struggle. He never expected his own son to stand up and cut the air with words that could change everything. The silence was unbearable. Janet's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the worn handbag she always carried to work. She had worked 60-hour weeks as a nursing assistant, wiping sweat and blood in hospital rooms, raising David alone without a penny of support. Her heart swelled with pride but burned with terror. Her little boy had just stepped into a battlefield where giants fought with laws, money, and influence. "I'm sorry, young man," Judge Harrison finally said, lowering his glasses to get a better look at the skinny child who had dared to break protocol. "But this is a legal hearing between adults." David didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, opened a notebook filled with scribbles, and spoke with a calmness that made the room lean forward in disbelief. "I know, Your Honor. But I also know that according to Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by the United States, I have the right to speak in matters that directly affect me. And this case..." His voice cracked, then grew firm again. "This case affects me more than anyone." Robert shifted uncomfortably. His two attorneys, men with silver cufflinks and polished shoes, leaned in as though the boy were suddenly a threat. They hadn't prepared for this. No one had. "This is irregular," said Robert's lead attorney, Dr. Mitchell, straightening his tie. "The child cannot." "Why not?" David interrupted gently, but firmly. "If you really cared about my life, wouldn't you want to hear what I have to say?" The judge's eyebrows arched. This boy, barely tall enough to reach the microphone, had the entire room hanging on every syllable. Janet held her breath. She wanted to tell him to stop, to sit down, to let adults handle this, but deep inside she knew the truth. No adult was going to save them. Not this time. For weeks, David had been sneaking away after school, telling his mother he had homework projects. He had spent hours at the Chicago Central Public Library, flipping through dusty legal codes, guided by Ms. Rodriguez, a kind librarian with tired eyes and a patient heart. Janet thought it was just a hobby, a curious boy lost in books. She never knew he was preparing to fight a millionaire in open court. David opened his notebook and faced Robert directly for the first time. "I have evidence, Your Honor," he said. His small hand steady despite the storm swirling inside him. "Evidence of why I should stay with my mother. Evidence of my father's real motives." Robert's face turned pale. His lawyers stiffened. The boy hadn't even started, and already, the weight of his words felt heavier than the thickest legal file. "I'm listening," Judge Harrison said quietly, leaning forward. David turned a page with surgical precision. "In the last 9 years, my father has visited me exactly 4 times. Twice for birthdays, always late. Once at Christmas, when he had 20 minutes free between parties. And once when the local newspaper did a story on philanthropists and he needed a photo with a child. I was that child." The room stirred. Janet's tears burned behind her eyes. David's voice sharpened. "And 2 weeks after his last visit, when he criticized our furniture, complained about the smell of hospital medicine on Mom's clothes, and suggested I might have potential if given a proper education, he filed for custody. Not out of love. Out of convenience." Robert opened his mouth to speak, but the words died as David flipped another page. "I researched, Your Honor. Found lawsuits. 3 in the past 18 months. Lost millions. I found divorce papers. His third wife is leaving him. And I found something about my grandmother, Eleanor Wellington. Robert's fingers twitched on the table. Sweat trickled down his temple. David's lips curved into the faintest, most dangerous smile a child could wear. She created a trust fund. $1.7 million. For me. Accessible when I turn 18. Or immediately, if my father gains custody. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The boy closed his notebook. This custody battle isn't about me. It's about money. Robert slammed his fist on the table. This is outrageous. He's a child. He doesn't understand. Then why am I the only one speaking the truth? David shot back, his small voice echoing off the marble walls. The judge raised his hand to silence the chaos. His eyes locked on Robert. And for the first time that morning, Robert looked small. Smaller than the boy he had dismissed all his life. But David wasn't finished. He pulled out a manila folder from his school bag, packed with documents, clippings, and photos. I can prove everything. 17 lawsuits. Families destroyed by Wellington Industries. And one recording. A recording of my father saying exactly what he planned to do with me if he won custody. The courtroom froze. Janet covered her mouth. Robert's lawyers exchanged panicked glances. And Judge Harrison, who had seen decades of custody cases, leaned forward. His face carved with disbelief. The recorder clicked, and Robert's own voice filled the room. As soon as I get custody, the boy is going to Riverside Military Academy. They'll keep him locked up until he's 18. Meanwhile, I'll have full control of the funds. He won't know a thing. The sound of betrayal was louder than thunder. Janet wept openly. Robert tried to rise, but the judge's gavel slammed down. The words hung in the air, inescapable, undeniable, unforgettable. And for the first time in his life, Robert Wellington III realized he wasn't fighting his ex, or her lawyer, or even the system. He was fighting his own son. Robert's face turned red as he lunged forward, his lawyer grabbing his arm to pull him back down. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder, shaking the walls. Mr. Wellington, you will sit down and remain silent unless spoken to. For the first time in years, Robert obeyed. His towering confidence, his arrogance polished by decades of privilege, seemed to collapse under the weight of a 9-year-old's words. David adjusted his blazer sleeve, almost too big for him, and pushed the recorder back into his bag. He stood straighter, his small frame defiant against the man who had once abandoned him. He didn't tremble. He didn't blink. The courtroom spectators leaned forward, whispering. A janitor paused at the doorway. Even the court clerk stopped typing for a moment. This wasn't just a custody case anymore. It had become a spectacle, a battle of truth against money, of a boy against a machine too big for most men to fight. Janet wiped her tears quietly. Her son wasn't just speaking, he was shining. But deep inside, a mother's heart quaked. She knew Robert wasn't the kind of man to lose gracefully. He was dangerous, vindictive, and armed with power that could crush lives without effort. David, Judge Harrison said after a long pause, his voice heavy with both authority and compassion. Do you understand the risks of what you're saying? Do you understand what it means to stand in this court and accuse your father? David's voice was steady, though his hands gripped the table so tight his knuckles turned white. Yes, Your Honor. Understand. But I also understand what will happen if I stay silent. My mom will lose me. I'll lose her. And my dad will use me for money like I'm not even a person. That's not family. That's prison. The judge studied him for a long, silent moment. It was as if the entire room had been sucked into a vacuum, every heart beating in rhythm with the boy's courage. Robert's lawyer finally stood, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The boy has been coached. No, David interrupted again, louder this time. No one told me what to say. I found the truth myself. I wrote every word myself. Do you want me to read it? I'll read it all. Every night I stayed up, writing down what I remembered. Every promise he broke. Every moment my mom cried because she had nothing to give me but love. Do you want me to read that? His voice cracked, not from weakness but from fire. The courtroom went silent again. Even Robert's lawyer lowered his head, unable to continue. The judge rubbed his temples, exhaling slowly. This court will review the evidence provided by young Mr. Thompson. Until then, custody will remain with the mother. Furthermore, due to the nature of the accusations and the recording. His eyes shifted toward Robert, piercing through his composure like knives. The father will be subjected to an immediate financial and ethical investigation. Robert's world collapsed. His $1,000,000 smile evaporated. His lawyers whispered frantically, shuffling papers, already planning an appeal. But nothing could erase the sound of his own voice betraying his intentions. Janet gasped, covering her face, tears streaming down uncontrollably. For years she had carried shame, rejection, and hopelessness on her shoulders. For years she believed her son deserved better than what she could give. But in that moment she realized, David had inherited her strength, multiplied it, and turned it into fire. David turned to her, his eyes soft now, his small hand reaching for hers. "Mom," he whispered, "we're going to be okay." But as the judge banged the gavel and adjourned the session, Robert's cold eyes locked on his son. There was no love there, no remorse, only a dangerous promise of revenge. And deep in Janet's chest, a new fear grew. This battle wasn't over. That night, rain poured down on Chicago like the city itself was trying to wash away the sins spoken inside that courtroom. Janet stood by the small window of their two-bedroom apartment, staring out at the blur of headlights on the wet streets. David sat on the couch, his blazer folded neatly beside him, his notebook still clutched in his arms as if it were a shield. For the first time since the trial, silence stretched between them. Janet's heart wanted to celebrate, to lift her son in her arms and thank God for his courage. But her instincts whispered a darker truth. Robert was not done. Men like him didn't lose without striking back. "Mom!" David's voice was soft, almost childlike again. "Did I do the right thing?" Janet turned, her eyes wet. She knelt beside him, brushing back his messy curls. "You did more than right, baby. You saved us. You saved me." Her voice cracked with pride and fear all at once. "But," she hesitated, then forced a smile, "we have to be careful now." David lowered his gaze. He had seen it too, the way Robert had looked at him like a predator sizing up prey. He wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over. Meanwhile, across the city, Robert sat in his penthouse office, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. His lawyers had left hours ago, leaving him with the echo of his own downfall. On the massive screen in front of him, news channels replayed the moment his son's recording had been revealed. Social media was ablaze. #LittleLawyer was trending. Strangers were calling David a hero, a genius, the boy who stood up to power. Robert smashed the glass against the wall. "That boy humiliated me," he hissed. His reflection in the dark window glared back at him, hollow and furious. "My own son." He picked up his phone and made a single call. "It's time. Do whatever it takes. I want them broken. Both of them." The man on the other end, a shadowy voice dripping with menace, replied calmly, "Consider it done." Back at the apartment, Janet tucked David into bed. For once, he looked like the child he still was. Small, exhausted, vulnerable. She kissed his forehead, whispering a prayer. Then she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bills scattered across the counter. Rent was late again. Hospital shifts barely covered food. And now, with Robert's wrath looming, the weight of survival grew heavier than ever. 2 days later it began. Janet's job at the hospital suddenly called her into HR. "Budget cuts," they said coldly. "We have to let you go." She knew better. She saw the smirk in the supervisor's eyes, the quiet whisper of connections money could buy. That evening, Their landlord slipped a notice under the door. "You're 2 months behind. Pay by Friday or you're out." And then the final blow. A black car parked outside their building. Every night, same car. Same shadowy figure inside, watching. Waiting. David noticed first. "Mom, why is that car always there?" Janet's stomach twisted. She pulled the curtain shut. "Don't look, baby. Just don't." But David couldn't ignore it. He felt it, the storm gathering again. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night, as thunder rolled through the sky, David sat up in bed, clutching his notebook. He whispered into the darkness, "If he wants a fight, then I'll be ready." And somewhere in the city, Robert smiled coldly. His plan already in motion. The morning sun rose pale and cold, as if even the sky was afraid of what was coming. Janet woke to the sound of fists pounding on the door. Her heart jumped. She rushed to the entrance, pulling David behind her. "Who is it?" she called, her voice trembling. "Chicago Police Department. Open up." Janet froze. Her knees weakened. She slowly unlocked the chain and opened the door just enough to see 2 officers standing tall in the hallway, their eyes stern. Behind them, neighbors peeked through half-open doors, whispering. "Janet Thompson?" one officer asked. "Yes," she whispered. "You're under investigation for fraud and negligence in your workplace. We need you to come with us for questioning." Janet's world spun. Fraud. Negligence. I didn't do anything." David stepped forward. His little hands clenched into fists. "She didn't. She worked day and night, she." "Stay back, son," the officer said softly, almost with pity. "We're just following orders." Tears stung Janet's eyes as they handcuffed her right in front of David. "Mom!" he screamed, clutching her arm until another officer gently pried him away. The hallway filled with gasps and whispers. To them it looked like justice. To David it felt like the world collapsing. Janet turned her face toward her son as they pulled her away. "David, remember what I told you. You're stronger than you know. Don't be afraid." The door slammed shut behind them. David stood alone in the silence of the apartment. His breath shaking, his fists trembling. He knew exactly who was behind this. Robert. Hours later, David sat in the library, staring at his open notebook. Ms. Rodriguez, the kind librarian, watched him from a distance. She finally walked over, kneeling beside him. "What's wrong, David?" "They took her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They took my mom. He's doing it. My father. He's using everything he has to crush us." Ms. Rodriguez placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then you'll need to be smarter than him. You've already proven you're braver. Now prove you're stronger." David wiped his tears and opened a fresh page. He began writing faster than ever before. He wasn't just taking notes, he was building a defense plan. Meanwhile, across town, Robert sat in his luxury office, smirking as news of Janet's arrest spread online. "This is only the beginning," he muttered to himself. His phone buzzed. It was the same shadowy voice from before. "She won't last long in holding," the man said. "They'll break her." "But the boy, what about him?" Robert's eyes narrowed. He poured another drink, the ice clinking like chains. "Don't worry. He'll come crawling to me. When he has no one left, he'll have no choice but to call me father." But Robert underestimated something. The fire in David's chest. That night, while the city slept, the little boy turned the pages of law books, old court cases and handwritten notes. Every word was fuel. Every tear was armor. And under the dim glow of a library lamp, David whispered the same promise again. If he wants a fight, then he's going to get one. The next morning, the small apartment felt emptier than ever. Janet's scent still lingered on the couch cushions. Her favorite coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink, but her laughter and warmth were gone. David sat on the floor with his notebook spread open, the pages filled with plans, evidence, and words too heavy for a boy his age. He knew waiting wouldn't save her. He had to act. At noon, David put on the same oversized blazer and walked to the courthouse. His school bag strapped tight against his shoulders. The plaza outside was swarming with cameras and reporters, buzzing about Janet Thompson's sudden arrest. Stories were already spinning. Hospital fraud, negligence, a mother unfit to raise her child. Exactly the narrative Robert wanted. David stood at the edge of the crowd, his small figure almost invisible against the sea of suits and microphones. For a moment, fear gripped him. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out the noise around him. He was just a kid. What if they laughed? What if they ignored him? Then he remembered his mom's words. "You're stronger than you know." He climbed onto the courthouse steps, pulled his notebook from his bag, and shouted with all the strength in his lungs. "Wait!" The crowd turned. Cameras swiveled. Reporters hushed. A boy, barely 9, stood before them, his voice shaking but fierce. "You're all writing lies about my mom. But I have the truth. And you're going to hear it." Dozens of microphones pushed toward him. A reporter whispered, "That's the kid, the one from the custody trial." Another gasped, "The little lawyer." David opened his notebook. His hands trembled, but his voice grew stronger with each word. "My mom didn't steal anything. She worked in that hospital for years. She cleaned blood, she comforted patients, she held dying people's hands when no one else would. And now they're saying she's a criminal. Do you know why? Because my father wants to destroy her. Because he thinks money can buy everything, even me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cameras zoomed in. David turned to the reporters, his eyes blazing. "Do you want a real story? Then write this. A rich man is trying to take his son by framing the woman who raised him. He wants to throw me into a boarding school and steal my future. That's the truth. Write that." The plaza exploded with flashes. Reporters shouted questions all at once. "Do you have proof? What about your father's statement? What will you do if the court doesn't listen?" David lifted a small USB drive into the air, his hand trembling but high. "I have proof. Recordings. Documents. Everything. And if the court won't hear me, then the whole world will." For the first time Robert, watching live from his penthouse, felt his stomach drop. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The boy had just turned his private war into a public one, and the world was listening. The press conference had shaken the sea.